Hi, this is Chris from Eurorail Hobbies and More, and in this video we're going to take a look at the ESU SwitchPilot Servo Accessory Decoder. The SwitchPilot Servo is a member of ESU's SwitchPilot family of decoders, but in this case it's designed specifically to control 4 servo motors like this one. This is a small 9-gram servo motor commonly used in radio control aircraft or small robotics. A servo motor generally consists of a body containing a controller circuit board, a DC motor, and a gear train which drives the servo's shaft over a 180-degree turn. A variety of styles of servo arms can be fit onto the shaft depending on what kind of movement you're looking to control. Servos can be used to control turnouts or switches, add any kind of animation to your model railroad such as opening engine shed doors or road crossing barriers, operating signals, or even raising and lowering a flag. So let's open up our box. Inside we have our SwitchPilot decoder, an English and German instruction manual, and a small disconnect power plug to make wiring easier. Looking at our decoder, across the top we have the 4 power connections, 2 for the connection of our DCC system or track power, and 2 for connecting an additional DC or AC power supply. We do recommend using a separate 12 to 15 volt AC-DC power supply so the decoder is not drawing on your main track power to move the servo motors. Across the top of the decoder we have 3 buttons and 5 LEDs for manually programming it. The decoder can also be programmed using CVs through the programming connection of your DCC command station or via programming on the main. I should note that all SwitchPilots are compatible with both standard DCC systems and Marklin Motorola digital formats, with the SwitchPilot automatically detecting the format when it's configured. One end of the decoder we have the interface for connecting a SwitchPilot extension, which is optional. The SwitchPilot extension allows you to add 4 bipolar relays to the decoder if you like. If you are throwing turnouts with servos and need to power the live frogs of the turnout, you can use these relays to accomplish that. On the other side of the decoder we have the 4 3-pin connections for the servos and a row of 8 2-pin connections which are used for adding push-button controls for each of the servos. These are great to have if you want to add some push-button switches to the front of your layout and throw the servos there. Using these connections, the decoder can also be used as just a simple servo controller without a connection to a DCC system. Okay, so now we have our SwitchPilot Servo ready to connect to our DCC system. In this case we're using a first generation ESU ECOS command station. So here you can see I've wired the DCC signal into the connection plug, and then I've just jumpered over the same signal to act as the power supply for the decoder. If this was my layout, I'd be using a separate power supply for the power connections, but for the purpose of this demonstration this will do. Let's plug it in. Okay, so let's add a servo. ESU recommends you cut the power to the decoder for plugging a servo in, so let's do that. We'll plug the servo in and turn our track power back on. Servos will always have a 3-pin plug, 2 for the power supply and 1 for the signal from the controller. You can always see the proper way to plug your servo in on top of the decoder here. Now the first thing we need to do is program the decoder's address, and for this video we'll use the manual programming buttons across the top of the decoder. This can also be done by programming CVs if your digital system supports that. To start we're going to hold down the main programming button for 2 seconds until we get a consistent flashing LED, a steady flash. Once the LED is flashing, the SwitchPilot Servo decoder is in learning mode and we can program an address. To program an address, we simply go to our digital command station, and what we want to do is just trigger the accessory address that we want the first servo output of the decoder to be. For example, we're going to use address number 9 today, so our 4 servo outputs will be programmed to addresses 9, 10, 11, and 12. So let's trigger address number 9 now. When the decoder gets the signal, it will light the programming LED solid for a few seconds to indicate that the programming was successful. Then the LED will turn off and the decoder will go back into operation mode. So let's trigger number 9 and test that our decoder is working properly. There you go, you can see our servo is throwing. So the next thing we want to do is program the settings for each individual servo. This can be done by simply holding the programming button down until we get an intermittently flashing LED. Now you can also see that when I release the programming button, the LED for the first servo output lit up, indicating that we are programming servo number 1. Now we can program the start position, end position, and speed of each servo. The first one will be the start position. You can see the servos move to that position. I can use the plus and minus programming buttons to adjust that position. And I can press the programming button again to move it to the end position, and again use the plus and minus buttons to adjust it. If you look closely, you can see the arm moving in small steps every button press. When you're happy with the end position, press the main programming button again, and the servo will start to continuously throw back and forth. This indicates that we can now use the plus and minus buttons to adjust the speed of the throw. So if we keep pressing the button, you can see the speed is slowing down and then speeding back up. When we're happy with that, we just press the programming button again, and you can see the second programming LED has lit up for the second servo output. We don't have any servos there, so we'll just keep pressing the button until all the programming buttons are no longer lit. That indicates we're back in operation mode. Now we can trigger the servo again and see that our new settings for start and end position and speed have taken effect. Okay, so now we're ready to install the decoder on the layout. Once it's installed, you can adjust all the settings using the programming button still, or if accessing the decoder under your layout is going to be awkward, you can use programming on the main if your digital system supports that feature. It's a good idea to install these where they're accessible though, as it's much quicker just to use the programming buttons in my experience, especially if you're just fine-tuning quick adjustments to the servo positions for turnout, throwing, etc. Now before we finish, let's take a quick look at how you might throw a turnout or switch with a servo. Here's a servo motor I've started to set up. I've just taken a 2.5 inch of music wire, about the same thickness as a paperclip, and used pliers to bend it into a shape that fits into the existing holes on the servo arm. The long part of the wire can extend up through the benchwork of your layout and then go through the throw bar of your turnout. Here's a sample that I've already set up on a piece of 1/2 inch gator board with some cork, just like I use for sub-road bed on my layout. I've mounted the servo underneath with some heavy-duty double-back tape. One thing I should mention is that some of the less expensive servos can come with a bit of grease on the outside of the case, and you really want to clean that off with an alcohol wipe or other cleaner so that the adhesive on the tape can adhere properly. You definitely don't want to come back to your layout and find these misaligned or dangling off the bottom because the adhesives failed. Now I've just mounted an N-scale Payco turnout on the top here. So let's plug this in and turn off our track power. And there you go. And you can see we're throwing our turnout. Now the Payco turnouts do have an over-center spring designed to keep the points pressed tightly against the stock rails of the turnouts. So when this one throws, you get a bit of a clicking action. That'll happen for any Payco turnouts, but other turnouts, the throw bar will throw quietly and smoothly, just like some of the much more expensive stall motor switch machines. So especially in HO, you can get a really nice slow throw with the servo motor. Can look very realistic. Okay, so that's it for our look at the SwitchPilot Servo and installing it on a turnout. We'll come back and cover the standard ESU SwitchPilot Accessory Decoder in a future video.